I don't know if anybody's here. I see one person might be here. Maybe it's just me. I am here for Still Alive, and I'm excited to be here for whomever may be listening and to talk about writing a quarantini tale. So everybody is at home, and we're all dealing with the facts about COVID-19, which kind of sounds like a science fiction character, if you ask me, like a robot or something. And I want to present something about uh, characters, inventing characters, and maybe using some of your time that you have at home if you're alone and you're looking for something to do and you're dying to write about what's going on right now, because basically this is living history, what's happening. And you can write your own story or keep a journal or whatever you want. But I, um, I want to know, what's going on with you. So part of what I'm doing is talking today a little bit about how I invent characters and how I write books, and asking perhaps if you will indulge me and maybe some of you will write a little story and send it to me at my website. So I'm going to repeat this later, but this is where you can write to me at my website, laura@lauradower.com. And all the things that we talk about here, I'm hoping that you will be able to put some of them to use with your own great ideas. So, what's my story? Here's the deal. So, I am a writer. I started out working in publishing, and I've probably written about 120 books for different ages, picture books, chapter books, middle grade fiction. I've actually now ghostwritten some books for grown-ups. But what I love most of all is writing stories for the chapter book and middle grade age. Um, I love the stories that come out of these inventive, brilliant imaginations that you have. And I love the language and the creativity that you are inspired to use in the stories, and the really each other and about what they're writing and the way they use each other to ping pong pinball ideas off of one another. The best thing about being a writer, and I have been doing this for a long time now, and I've been doing it as a mom and as I've got three teenagers, and they are currently at home, as we all are at home, hopefully. And the thing about writing is that I can take sort of an unusual path with my work, and I can use and be inspired by whatever comes across my day. So the events that we're dealing with now, I feel like it is an opportunity for you to kind of dig deep into your creative brain and to think about ways that you can use these events to inspire you and to make you a really better writer, even. And we're experiencing a lot of crazy stuff. And I can tell you, for starters, one of the things that I find really interesting is that on this or on any writing workshop or late night TV or anything that's being hosted, because we are all in our individual homes, one really cool thing is that you're seeing people's homes. You're seeing their environment. You're seeing where they work and where they get inspired. And right now, I'm looking at my computer on my desk, but what I see is this. So this is what I'm looking at right now. So it's my computer, and there's my glasses, which were off, and my favorite orange coffee cup mug, which looks like a library card or an old-fashioned library card, and my lamp, and all of the pictures and postcards and buttons and fortunes. I collect fortunes. I have a whole stack of them on the side of my desk too. And little figurines like, let's see, oh yeah, Ursula, she's the best. Oh, this is kind of a fun one. This is Greedo from Star Wars, and there's a Post-it that's taped to his back, and it says, "Write, or I will blast you with my laser." And I stuck that Post-it on him 20 years ago when I left my job in publishing, and he's been on my desk ever since. Yes, he is threatening me, but sometimes I need to be threatened. So, what's cool though about this bulletin board is that creating a character in any story is a lot like building your own bulletin board and a collection of the objects. And what I find is a lot of children's authors who maybe I'm friends with on Facebook or that I know personally or that I visited even, their spaces are awesome and they have all this great stuff around them. And I'm sure that you have the same in your bedrooms. Or you have your family has an amazing kitchen or a basement that's filled with mementos and books and games and a foosball table, or maybe you live in a small apartment. And so the objects that you have carefully curated for your space are very important to you, or you have one poster that you cherish, that you love, or maybe you don't have all those things. But nonetheless, all of those environments reflect you and reflect your character and your personality. So when you're thinking about writing a character and inventing one, you should imagine that they also have a universe that they live in and they have all sorts of details about themselves. And it seems and feels overwhelming sometimes when you're writing anything, especially a story where you're inventing a character. But the truth is that there are little ideas and tips and tricks and things you can find in your own life that you can reflect on the page, or things that you get inspired by other authors, perhaps, that you can reflect on the page as well. So that's where I want to start. Here we are, we're quarantined, and I'm going to raise up my light a little bit. Ah, there's my face. So we are quarantined together, and yet we are apart. But what might bring us together is the ability to invent and to share. And that is so important. So, this is the first time I've ever done one of these two. So, if I'm looking here and there and everywhere, just sort of stick with me and we'll get through this together. And uh, one of the things that people ask me a lot as an author when I am either just casually talking to someone or people write fan mail or whatever it is, they ask about where we get our ideas. And usually, another thing too is how do you invent the character and how do you go on with it? So I wanted to go through some of the different things that I've done in books that I've written. And not every character is based on real life. Although there are definitely parts of every character that we write. And I would say this is, I don't want to speak for the whole world of authors, but you can't help but be influenced and inspired by those things that are around you in your real life. Now, Madison Finn is a series that I did, and it's 20 years old, actually. This was the original books. So, what happened is that I wrote these 25 books over a period of, within a period of like 10 years. And then I actually went back and revised all of them and wrote a new one. And then those books are published now as ebooks by Open Road Media, and they're all available online. And perhaps you want to check them out, that'd be great. But one of the things that's been great for me on the journey of writing is that this character has lived with me for these 20 years so far of my writing career, and she's still out there kicking. And Madison is, in fact, based a little bit on me. I, like Madison, am an only child, and I, like Madison, was in the middle of a pretty ugly divorce when I was a kid, and that was back in the 70s, late 70s. So it was a long time ago when divorce wasn't quite as common, actually. And when friends at school all had fairly intact families. So I was a little bit of an outsider. And I always tell people that my personal experience that really shaped me is that because of that situation in my own life, when I was in sixth grade, I was in one school. In seventh grade, I moved and I was in another school, a much bigger school, and it was a public junior high school. I was in a Catholic school, then a public junior high school, and then I moved to New York City because my mom remarried, and I was in a private school in Manhattan. And the three different experiences, orange, just like Madison, by the way. Mm, the three different experiences were sort of like a range of everything that middle schoolers experience, from living in a more rural area to living in an urban area, and the different kinds of schools and different things. So it was very thought-provoking and really inspired basically my whole career. And Madison is sort of the cornerstone of characters that reflects a lot of those experiences. So part of also what she goes through is this idea of being lonely and wanting friends, all the things that all of us go through in seventh grade. And if you are watching this and you are in a younger grade or in seventh grade, or older even, I mean, I think it's something we all have in common. And again, here we are, and we have another thing to share, correct? So there's 25 books in the series, and one of the things that I love most about her is that when I revised all of the books, I was able to do it without really, I don't really tend to write with trendy current terms and language. I reflect current activities, but I like it to be something that's sort of longer lasting. So that is why Madison, although book series sometimes come and go, I feel like I can still keep her around and make her change with the times. And she has. So that is one of my favorite cornerstone characters. But there are other series and other books that I've done. Now, when I first left publishing, I worked at Scholastic Books and got to work with some great authors there and great people in publishing. And one of the projects that I worked on when I first left and when my first job was this series called Real Teens. Now, this is a million years ago, like predating reality television and all of that. And there were 6 books in the series, and they were based on the real life journals of kids who kept journals for me during the year. And then I would get their journals and I would turn their journals into books that was alternating entries and weave them into one narrative, one story. So the characters in these books were real people that I made anonymous, and I took some liberties with their lives a little bit, and then the places, we had to make everything anonymous. That was very cool. So building the characters for this was kind of interesting because it was actual stuff I was getting, material, but I had to fictionalize it. I had to make it unique for the books that we were making. One of my favorite series that I did, which had a little bit of was around for a little bit of time, was called Monster Squad. And Monster Squad, I had 4 books. And what I loved about Monster Squad was that it was based in a world that I invented because I was inspired by some real life characters, one of whom was R.L. Stine, the author of Goosebumps, who I worked with very, very closely when I was at Scholastic. And he's a funny guy, more than a scary guy. Sorry to say that, but he is a really great at that suspense, that sort of safe scares is what we always said about Goosebumps. And I love that. And why I loved it wasn't because, so he didn't directly inspire this, but it gave me the belief that I could tell my own monster stories, which is when I was a kid, I loved B monster movies, the cheesy ones. The more that the blood looked like ketchup, the better. Like cardboard Godzilla, like that was the best. So I love that whole world. And there is a real life man who is no longer with us, but his name, he was alive at the time when I actually wrote this, and his name was Forrest Ackerman. And he was a collector of movie memorabilia, and he was really had a magazine about monsters and monster movies and science fiction. And he is like one of the people that inspired George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and a whole generation of kids who grew up in the 60s and 50s and beyond. And they basically, he was schlocky. I mean, let's just call it what it is. So I was inspired by him to invent my character, Oswald Leary. And Oswald Leary is this film director who brings together these 4 kids, and their names are Jesse Ranger, and that's Jesse right there, and Damon Malloy, Stella Min, and Lindsay Gomez. And these four characters each narrate one of these books in the series. So the first one is Jesse Ranger, and he is obsessed with Oswald Leary and the movies. The second one is Damon Malloy, and he also has a connection to the movies because his family had a drive-in. And so they showed the movies, and he's actually secretly, even though he's the bully, he's scared of bugs. So his book, of course, is about the giant bug. And then this is a beast. Stella Min is this sort of high-kicking, power super feminist, strong girl character. And it turns out that her great aunt was one of the original stars of Oswald Leary's movies. And Lindsay Gomez is a photographer, filmmaker, wannabe filmmaker. And she is pretty awesome. And she also is connected in some way to Oswald Leary. And so the four of them join forces because they have discovered that the movies are escaping. The movie monsters are escaping from the stories, from the movies, and they have to figure out how to stop them. So there's slime, there's megabugs, and there's a beast with 1,000 eyes, and a shout out to friend Dave Schlafman, who's an amazing illustrator who did these books with me. And another series that I've done with characters are the Dessert Diary books. And these were done. And what's interesting about the characters in these books is that they are each living in the same orbit, in the same neighborhood. But the primary character of the book is this woman, Daisy. And she's this woman who runs this bakery. And the bakery itself is kind of a character. It's a pretty magical place. And so when the girls each have their own experience, the bakery kind of helps them through a hard time. And Maggie is one of the characters in here. And also Kiki is like the super, super smart science girl who loves to bake because, of course, baking and science. There's always a personal connection. They're not necessarily a verbatim part of my life, but they are, when you tell your story, characters are fully rounded by your own experiences and by the things that you like or the things that inspire you. Now, before you write, now, let's see if I can get this straight. There's so many things I want to say. I guess I don't have to say them all at one time. But because I would love it if you, upon viewing this, would write me a tiny, and by tiny, like a page or two, I would love it most of all if you would invent a character and start them on a journey, and then let's see where that person goes, or that monster, or COVID-19, the crazy robot from the future, whichever. But some of the things hot tips basically for doing this are that you want to, there's a lot of lists out there about how to write a character and sort of top 10 things you can say or do and what you need to include and everything. And there are some thoughts I have about this from talking to kids over time and from my own experiences. One thing that I always found to be a great tip was, instead of thinking, because a big theme for me is there's a blank page in front of you, what do you do now? And it's really, really hard to get started. So pretending is a good way. So you pretend that you're interviewing somebody who already exists, who's fully formed, who you see. So just pretend that and then interview them. What do you like to do? Who's your best friend and why? Who don't you like? Did somebody do something mean to you? Do you have brothers and sisters? What do you look like? Describe what you see or what you think you might see. Do you have any special skills? Like, can you do a back bend? Or can you do a back walkover on the way? Or can you speak dolphin or whatever it is? You want to describe what, we talked earlier about what my office looks like, and you want to describe, that's my phone. You want to describe what their environment is and where they live and what they look like and what their style is. And You want to know what their favorite movie is. What's your favorite music? So here you are, you're conducting an interview basically in your head, and you're writing down what you're being told. And maybe it doesn't fully make sense, but sometimes when we think too much, it's get those details. I'm very big on dump it, just get it out, and then figure out how to organize it. Because if we think too hard, it's sometimes really, really difficult. You want to always make things simpler, and that will help you to write, especially a teeny tale. So when you get stuck, just remember we all get stuck, and it's icky and it's ugh, and you don't know where to go. But it's work. It's a little bit of work, but it's worth it. You don't have to know all the answers. Just keep asking questions. Now, and another thing too is another idea that I just saw on my little list, my crib sheet here that I'm so not very well looking down at, like I'm pretending to be nonchalant, but I'm completely not nonchalant. So you can imagine that person, this brings us into the developing your story. It isn't just a straight an interview with information. You want to begin to bridge to think about what now is that character going to do. So when you're asking questions like, what do you like to do? Or what are your hobbies? Or where did you go on vacation? You start to think about putting your character into action. And a lot of this is imagining where you're going with things. So if you are imagining what happens if your character has a trip to the emergency room, or what if they're going to the principal's office, because bad trips are sometimes kind of fun to think about. Like, how do they react? I mean, a character has to be a certain way. Like when you're faced with conflict, and that is the most important part of every story. Conflict is that essence of energy, that moment in a story or throughout the story, that tension that keeps us reading, that keeps us interested. And when you're doing that, you want to remember all the details about it. You want to remember all your senses alive. There's so many of these little tricks about, I'm trying to throw out as many as I can so you have little touchstones when you're writing your story. Oh, I'm stuck. All right, let me think about the five senses. What else can I add in? And don't just think about negative. Think about, what is a time when everybody clapped for you, and how good did you feel about yourself, and what magic happened because of that. So when you're focusing on the details of your character, there are qualities too that you want to think about. Um, there are essences of characters that you love from the books that you read. So I have a few suggestions. So let's just go through them. A character can be wise. So if you have a wise character, you might think of a smart character, and you might describe them and think of a character that you already love, like wise, we think of maybe Albus Dumbledore from Harry Potter, someone who's old with a gray beard and he's got magical powers and he's always all knowing. His wisdom is sort of greater than just a person, it's greater than we can even imagine. And that's great. Something greater than you can imagine means there's plenty of room for ideas and plenty of room to keep growing. Another wise character, and probably one of my very favorite characters in all of fiction, is Charlotte from Charlotte's Web, because she is so kind and smart and connected to Wilbur, and such a good mom to her babies and to Wilbur, and just generous and so wise, and her wisdom sort of is the anchor of that story, and her web, obviously. So there are other qualities. Being smart. My favorite character in my youth was Nancy Drew, because I love mysteries. I have a weird thing too where I love mysteries and I will forget who did it because I like it so much. I want to reread it and enjoy it all over again. I am not really a one and done person with mysteries. I like to see how it was unraveling and what the characters did and how they reacted and what ideas they got and clues, and sort of the suspenseful buildup of the stories. And of course, if we think of smart, we can go back to Harry Potter, because one of the sheroes of the day is definitely Hermione. And then for boys, it's Encyclopedia Brown or Percy Jackson, or I'm sure, fill in the blank, you've got your own smart characters that you also know and love. Naughty would be somebody like Huckleberry Finn, or perhaps if you're including picture book characters, which of course we want to, the Cat in the Hat. He was one naughty dude. And lovable would be somebody maybe like Winnie the Pooh, or who doesn't love corduroy, all of our favorites from our childhood. P.S. By my desk is my original teddy bear that I had when I was a baby. So, you keep these things to inspire you in your room because they are constant reminders of my emotional states of being, things that are warm and comforting and make me feel safe. And so when you go to your writing space, don't forget that. Spunky, like Pippi Longstocking or Ramona Quimby, everyone's fave. Curious, like Alice in Wonderland. And then bad, like bad to the bone, like the Wicked Witch. Or who did I just show? My girlfriend over here, Ursula, or Cruella de Vil. Disney's got a lot of good villains, princesses. So you kind of fall into stereotypes, but stereotypes are there for a reason. That you can flesh them out and make them less stereotypical, but they're not bad places to clinch onto. To have good, bad, it gets you started. It gets you. Because with good and bad, the one good thing about doing that is that you instantly get conflict. You instantly understand this versus this creates this tension. And as you write more and you develop a story or an idea more, you can then kind of make it a little subtler and add other details that make it a little more open. And one of the things that I wanted to say too, I keep saying one of the things, meanwhile, it's like the 19th thing that I've said. But another thing that I want to mention is names, because this comes up a lot when you're writing a story. Do I think of the name first? That's what everyone always asks me. And I have to say, I think I did think of Madison Finn, but she was Morgan for a really long time. And then one day, as I was writing the books, I realized that she just wasn't Morgan. She was Madison. I didn't know why. Just came to me. I wanted a name that was kind of a boy or a formal name that wasn't really a girly name, that seemed like kind of a forced name. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, of course, Madison is a very common name, but it wasn't so much when I first wrote the books in 2000, which was when the first one was published. And it's a more modern name now, but she did come to me as a name, and ultimately when I was writing. And her other friends, I thought a lot about them, the names. I didn't just have meaningless whatever names that were placeholders. I really did think, and I know that, like, someone who I know from work and from just reading all of her material, again, the common reference of our time, J.K. Rowling, she was a linguistics person and a language lover. And she gave great care into the names that she chooses. And they really are not just for people, but places and objects and magical spells and, all the history and research that's involved in the way she developed the naming of things in that book. I just think I'm just floored by it. It's magical. That is magical. And that is, again, naming something is really a very essential and important act. And so don't just throw any old name on. And if you need a name to get started, but always consider, yeah, my son's walking in the room. Oh my goodness. Okay, there's my son. Okay, my youngest son. There he goes. And when you consider, please shut the door. Thank you. When you consider the names of things, I wanted to read you a poem. I don't have to read the whole poem, but I'm going to start the poem. And maybe it's something that you might look up yourself. And there was an author, he was a poet and an author. 1939, this was written, and there is a musical and a kind of not a great movie, but based on this poem. It's a movie and a musical called Cats. But the poem itself was pretty wonderful. The collection, Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, I believe. And the naming of cats is one of the poems in there. And it's the naming of cats is a difficult matter. It isn't just one of those holiday games. You may think at first I'm as mad as a hatter when I tell you a cat must have 3 different names. And then he goes on. First of all, there's the name that the family use daily, such as Peter, Augustus, Alonzo, or James, such as Victor or Jonathan, George, or Bill Bailey. All of them sensible, everyday names. There are fancier names if you think they sound sweeter. And he goes on, and then he says a cat needs a name that's particular, and then needs a name that's peculiar or more dignified. And names of this kind, how can he keep his tail perpendicular, spread out his whiskers, cherish his pride? I can give you a quorum of names of this kind, such as Munkustrap, Quaxo, or Coricapat, such as Bombalurina, or else Jelly Lorem. And that's sort of the ones that are then brought out in the musical and the movie. But how fabulous the naming of things. And when you study books as you get older, and when you read the books that you're reading now, look at the names and what they mean. So when you ask me or yourself, what am I going to call this character? Don't just pick Annie because it's your favorite name. Think of your name in the context of how you're developing the character, and that it has meaning, and it brings a little bit of extra information, or it brings some good action to your character. If someone hates their name, they're going to want to give themselves a better nickname, or they have a story, or they're like Henry VI. So they've been like this long line of people with the same exact name. Like there's a lot embedded in that you can use, and that can be fun for developing your character. Other building blocks of making a story are so many, too many to talk about in one video. But of course, there are many things that I would like to mention, but we talked about character and how character counts. How you show character is through those traits and qualities that we discussed. It's through the names. It's through how you develop your character. And it's through dialogue. Don't forget the way your character speaks tells us a lot about who they are and how they work. But I want to just at least try to tip into this, because I am asking you, if you are watching this, that I would love you so much if you would send me a Quaran-teeny tale and power your plot. Here's a quick crib sheet on how to power your plot of your teeny tale. So you invent your character. So you're starting down here. There's your little character in your roller coaster car. And I'm sure that a lot of you have learned this in school. If you have not, then pay attention. Your plot journey should be simple. It should be, for the teeny tale that is, books that are long novels may have many loops in their roller coasters, many mountains in the mountain range. But this, I just want one roller coaster. And I want you to develop that character like we talked about. I want you to set up the character and the basic idea about what are they going to do? Where are they going to go? When they start to do something, the rising action, woohoo! You want to go up with the rising action. You get to a point, and there's your conflict, the climax. Something happens, something where there's opposing forces or some crazy thing happens. Now, what's important for a really good story, you always want your character to be in power, whether it's from lack of control or control. But it shouldn't always be things that are done to them. It should be, how do they handle it? How do they keep moving or don't move? It's what's going on in their head? What are their actions? They are the important element. They are in charge, and you are in charge of them. So that's why I say power your plot. You've got power. They've got power. You're all working together. Things just don't magically happen. You make them happen, and your characters make things happen. And that's a really, really critical thing about conflict and about getting through the plot of a story. So you reach your conflict, and then you have fireworks or whatever happens, somebody gets murdered, or no, that's not really appropriate, is it? How about they just have a fight, and then you go falling action, and falling action is just you're beginning to understand the circumstances and the consequences of what's happening, and you come down to the resolution and the end. And what I always say is, or the denouement, which is a French word meaning finish or ending. And fancy word, you will remember it, and then you will remember exposition to the denouement. And so you remember all 5 stops on your roller coaster as you power your plot. There you go. Okay, so that's important. Then there's one other thing that I cannot leave out, and that is this. Maybe the most important thing ever in all of writing. I think everybody who's out there would agree, and your English teachers, your ELA teachers will love you for this. If you begin to recognize show, don't tell. This is the ultimate rule for all of writing also. And why is it so important? Well, if you have a story and you say, it's raining out. Okay, you've told us it's raining. That's super awesome. Thank you very much for that information. But I'm the reader, and I really would like you to help me to be there, to see it, to feel it, to experience it. And not just to do that in an ordinary way, but to do it in a way that really reflects what you're saying and doing in the story as the writer. So when going back to my other piece, power again. So when I say power, like you have the power, you have to remember that by writing a story, even a Quaran-teeny tale, you have the power to make it whatever you want. And you create a world that is your reality, and you take me there. So don't tell me it's raining outside. Tell me, how is it raining outside? Like, does the sky get darker and then you hear the plink of raindrops on the roof? Do you get soaked the minute you step out of the car, right down to your socks? Like, how and what kind of rain is it? What does the sky smell like? What does the air smell like? I mean, what does the sky look like? Are there clouds, or is it just that thick gray that's just blanketing everywhere overhead? Like, show it to me. So now, I'm not going to keep you bored anymore with me talking at you. Me and Ursula, that is. I want you to go right now and write your own Quaran-teeny tale. I have no idea what you're going to write about. I would say write about perhaps something that maybe got canceled, or maybe you wish would still happen. Like, I know I have 2 kids in my house who are in plays that were postponed, and we're still praying and hoping that perhaps they'll still be put up. They're doing Zoom rehearsals. But if I asked them to write me a Quaran-teeny tale, it might be about something I wish that were happening. So it was kind of a projection onto a story that I wished for myself, or an authentic character. Or maybe it's just a straight up story about what you're experiencing and feeling right now through the eyes of a character that you invent. Or you can tell me a personal story, and your Quaran-teeny tale can maybe not invent characters, but rather tell me what you're going through. But I do think that taking time to really dig inside your head and find your creative self will make you feel better, kind of like a little exercise for your head, a little positive for your mind. And I'm guessing that many of you are playing Xbox, or reading books, or painting, or doing arts and crafts, or things like that. And take time to do some writing too. Keep a journal, or just spend some time with a pencil and some paper. And don't forget, doodling is another great end to telling stories. You cannot be afraid to just dump stuff out there. I think that if you want, you can invent characters like Kiki, who is nothing like me, but who I sure wish she were like my best friend or wish I had been more like her. I am not like Jesse Ranger, the boy who dreamed about Bee Monster meeting Oswald Leary and then it happened magically. I am not the bully who's afraid of bugs. And yet, in all of our characters, in all the stories that we write, there are pieces of ourselves, special parts of ourselves that we include. And I really hope that you will share some of them with me. Please go to laura@lauradower.com, and I'm going to try to post this on my website and try to be much more diligent about keeping up with my blog. I tend to get a little overwhelmed and don't do it, but I would love to, and I would love to have more of a connection with you. Have a good day. I hope everybody is healthy. I wish all the best to all of your families, and keep reading. Bye-bye.